Hello, my name is Ghanwa Hakim, and you are watching The Arabic Hour.
The way they do it is so dehumanizing and disempowering that over these years of 20 years of Oslo, we have a cumulative denial of self-determination from international aid that's almost equivalent to and goes alongside with the Israeli occupation itself.
Today, we would like to welcome to our program Dr. Nora Lester Murad. Dr. Lester Murad was born in Hollywood, California, and currently resides in Palestine with her husband. She holds a doctorate from Fielding University in Santa Barbara, a Master of Arts degree in Intercultural Relations from Lesley University, a Master's degree in Human Services from Fielding University, and a Bachelor of Arts degree in Middle East Studies from UCLA. In the past, she has served as an assistant professor of cross-cultural understanding at Bentley University and as an adjunct faculty at Lesley University. Dr. Lester Murad also worked as the corporate cultural competence strategist for Harvard Vanguard Medical Associates. Since moving to Palestine in 2004, Dr. Lesley Murad has worked with Palestinian non-governmental organizations, international non-governmental organizations, and United Nations agencies. She additionally has founded the Dalia Association, which she directed from 2006 to 2010. The Dalia Association is a community foundation that seeks to reduce dependence on international aid by reforming the international aid system. Our guest interviewer is pro-Palestinian rights activist Jeff Klein. Jeff is from Dorchester People for Peace. Now to Jeff to interview our guest as they discuss her life as an American married to a Palestinian living in Jerusalem, the current Israeli war of aggression on Gaza, and the improvement of the mission of NGOs to serve Palestinians more efficiently.
Hello and welcome to the Arabic Hour. We have as our guest today Nora Lester Murad. Welcome.
Thank you.
Nora, you're just coming from Jerusalem a few days ago, is that right?
That's correct.
Maybe before we get into the situation there, our viewers would be interested to know a little bit more about you and your background, how you got to be a resident of Jerusalem. So maybe you could explain a little bit.
Well, to fast forward over like 35 years, I am from the U.S. I'm actually from Pasadena, California. I went to UCLA and in my third year spent a junior year abroad in Cairo and then immediately did a senior year abroad in Jerusalem. And between those 2 years, I met and fell in love with the man who became my husband when I was 19 or something like that. And he's Palestinian with Israeli citizenship from a village near Nazareth. So we lived for many years in the United States. After meeting there, we lived in the United States for many years. And then in 2004, we took our 3 kids and moved back. No one can say what's permanent, but we moved back without a plan to live anywhere but there and to raise the girls there. So it's been 10 years now that I've been living in Jerusalem and living.
And what brings you to the United States?
Well, for personal reasons, my eldest daughter is 18. She's graduated from the Ramallah Quaker School, the Friends School, and is going to be going to college in the U.S. My second daughter was very fortunate to get a scholarship to do her 10th grade year in Washington, D.C. at the Sidwell School. So we brought the 2 of them here to kind of deliver them to their next life chapter, which is very happy for them and very, very sad for me.
Yeah. When kids go away to school, I can speak from personal experience, it's kind of a mixed blessing. You're happy for them, but you'll miss them.
Well, I will miss them, but whereas we do come to visit my family in the U.S. Usually every year, this was the first time that I was so very happy to leave. Mm-hmm. Things have never been, in my time living there, and previous to living there for 10 years, we visited quite often, and even back in the late 80s when I did various activist jobs for Palestinian rights and for peace with justice in the Middle East, living here in the Boston area, Cambridge area. In all that time, I don't remember things being quite this way.
What made you decide to move back long term to Jerusalem?
I think really it was recognizing on our trips to visit my in-laws that the girls were growing up as foreigners in their own village, in their own family, that they really didn't like the food, they didn't communicate with their grandparents with the same ease, that as time went by we were cheating them out of half of who they are. Some other things happened at the same time. One particularly influential meeting was with friends of ours who live here in the Boston area. The father's Palestinian and the mother's American, just like we are, and they have 2 sons. They raised them in the US, and the older one was 18 around that time, and said very casually around the dinner table, "I wish we had lived in Palestine. I would have been a different person. I would not have had to work so hard to feel comfortable when I'm there." And so to have a young person say that just at the moment that we were trying to decide, it really did matter. Both of us had wonderful jobs. We loved our jobs, and they were really good and cushy jobs, and jobs where we could influence and have the kind of social impact we wanted. So it wasn't easy, but once we'd made the decision, I think it was the right one.
So what's it like for you, as someone who grew up as an American, to now have part of your life in Palestine, married to a Palestinian, and especially more so, what's it like for your daughters who are growing up literally sort of with one foot in 2 different cultures?
Well, you know, since Oslo, everything changed with the Oslo Accord, 1993-94. After that, it's really not very strange to be an international person living in Palestine, and we talk in those terms, internationals, locals. So to be a U.S. person is not that strange, but most of the U.S. people and most of the foreigners are not like me, married to Palestinians. They are there on short-term job assignments with international organizations, either the United Nations or other NGOs, CARE, Oxfam, Mercy Corps, etc. So just walking around in either Jerusalem, East Jerusalem, or in Ramallah as a non-Palestinian, that's not strange at all. There was a time it was strange years ago, where people might wonder, are you a spy, are you a collaborator, are you an Israeli? It's not like that anymore. Very normal to have lots of foreigners around. There are also quite a lot of people in my situation. In fact, we have a whole Facebook group of spouses of Palestinians. So it's not really that unusual even for non-Palestinians to be married to Palestinians and living in Palestine. I don't find it strange at all. Now for the girls, they've had 2 different experiences. They were going to school in Jerusalem for many years, and finally, each one in a different year, finally, with great effort, got into the Quaker school in Ramallah, where I always wanted them to be. At their school in Jerusalem, I think it was unusual for them to have a foreign mom, and especially when they were little, there were times when they would say, "Mom, Mom, don't talk in English." And then they'd say, "But Mom, Mom, don't talk in Arabic." And then they'd say, "Don't talk!"
Right.
Because it was so embarrassing, you know, for them. But in Ramallah, that is not the case. Many of the kids at the Quaker school in Ramallah have some unusual situation. If not a mixed marriage, there are many, but if not, then maybe one of their parents is an ambassador and they themselves are living part of the year outside, part of the year inside. After Oslo, everything changed and became more polarized, a lot more inequality, a lot more, let's say, different realities coexisting.
How do you mean different inequality? Inequality among the Palestinian residents or between the Palestinians and expats from abroad?
No, within the Palestinian community. There are very rich people, and there are very poor people. So you can find the group that's maybe more similar to you. I don't think my kids feel I don't think they feel a total sense of belonging, but I think they do have some close friends, and it's not very weird for them anymore to have a foreign mom. I guess that was my point.
A foreign mom. So your kids see themselves primarily as Palestinians?
I think both. They're definitely Palestinian. And when they're there, I think they think they're also American too, but they have less knowledge, especially the little one. She left when she was 11 months old. They have less knowledge, less comfort, less familiarity with things in the U.S.
So, you know, in the U.S., everybody is something, right? My kids growing up had the same issue. So if people ask your kids, you know, what are you? Where are you from? How do they respond?
I think they say they're Palestinian or Palestinian and American.
Interesting.
I don't think they feel they need to defend America, but I think they feel they need to defend Palestine. They feel that there's this, you know, effort to eliminate Palestinians, and that they want to be placeholders and defenders of that identity. So they would maybe put that one up front.
And how do they feel about going to university in the United States or school in the United States? How does that?
I'm sure if I told you what I think, I'd misrepresent my daughter. I think like all kids in this situation, it's exciting, it's scary, it's wonderful, it's overwhelming.
Was it a question? That decision, was it questionable whether to pursue that in terms of higher education or to go to an Arab university?
Only a little bit, but I mean, obviously we'd love to have her home and not far away, and yet I really don't feel that, given that I have the choice, that I would feel comfortable choosing a lesser quality education, and I do feel that the Palestinian universities offer a lesser quality education. So. You know, they've already made a lot of sacrifices. I don't want them to sacrifice their higher education as well.
Well, I know we could go on talking about this interesting situation of your family.
Not interesting.
Well, I think the people here, especially if you're purely of American or European American background, it's an interesting story, culturally speaking. And we're going to move on to other topics, but I want to remind our viewers that more of your story is told at your website, NoraLesterMurad.com, and people who are interested in pursuing that further, you have a number of sort of personal writings on that website.
I do, and people can sign up, and I will send them a blurb every time there's a new post.
Okay.
I feel I work really, really, really hard to provide quality and unusual information to people, but there aren't really that many people signed up, so happy to have my work reach more people. And then when they comment, I try to answer. Whatever the comments are, I don't judge them or attack people for their questions.
Well, so I invite our viewers to check it out, NoraLesterMurad.com, and I'm going to do so myself.
Thank you.
So moving on somewhat, you're coming just now, a few days ago, from Jerusalem. And of course, many people here, especially activists and supporters of Palestinian rights, are concerned about the assault on Gaza that's going on right as we speak. And some of us, you've had some experience in Gaza, so have I, but I think it would be really useful in this situation for you to speak as someone enmeshed in the Palestinian community in Jerusalem and the West Bank, how the Gaza situation looks to people there. Because we don't hear about this as much. So could you respond to that?
Well, I'd like to share my perspective of it, not pretend that I can say what other people perceive. But from the changes that I've seen, let's say, over the last 2 months, before this recent escalation that started July 8th and after. I think there has been a lot of success from Israel's point of view from their efforts to divide the West Bank from Gaza. Of course, they're divided physically, and one cannot travel from one to the other. But in addition to that, they've succeeded to a great extent in dividing folks psychically.
Right.
That there's really, folks in the West Bank are really focused on what's happening in the West Bank. Folks in Gaza are really focused on what's happening in Gaza. And while people care and are informed, I don't think that they, until recently, have felt the attack on Gaza as being against them. And that's the change that I've sensed now. I think with this recent escalation, partly because it started in the West Bank.
Mm-hmm.
It started in the West Bank with what was the biggest, most massive military escalation in the last 10 years in the West Bank, to which there was then a response from Gaza, and then, aggression from Israel. I think now more and more people are on a psychic and emotional level feeling that the attack on Gaza is an attack on them, and that the front line of Gaza is the front line of the entire Palestinian struggle, and not just a struggle for peace and dignity in Gaza. So there's something major happening. It's major.
So what do you observe in terms of solidarity activity in the West Bank and occupied Jerusalem toward the situation in Gaza?
The West Bank is definitely a mess as far as I'm concerned. The Oslo/Palestinian Authority mechanism and bureaucracy is very, very entrenched. Most of the West Bank is somehow connected to the Palestinian Authority in ways that make people feel unable to speak out against the Palestinian Authority. And the Palestinian Authority has been on the wrong side for, as far as I'm concerned, for quite a while, and especially recently. So I think people feel shocked and paralyzed and a bit like they've had their stomach punched, not knowing what to do. Young people are more and more going out. When I left a week ago, there were demonstrations every single day and every single night in all kinds of places around the West Bank, and even, let's say, within Ramallah, in multiple places in Ramallah, in multiple places in Jerusalem, multiple places in Hebron. So it's definitely not an intifada, because somehow it hasn't, gelled, but there's more activity than in all the years that I can remember, and it's sustained and it's daily. The reaction to that activity is coming both from the the IDF, or the IOF, the Israeli Occupation Forces, as some people like to call them, and the Palestinian Authority. They're both using live fire against Palestinian demonstrators who are demonstrating in solidarity with Gaza. It's just shocking and horrible. It's horrible.
I mean, how do you and your neighbors view this activity from the Palestinian Authority, which I guess, as you describe it, is in collaboration essentially with the Israeli occupation authorities?
There are people who speak out a lot against the Palestinian Authority and call them collaborators and talk about, Mahmoud Abbas's strategy as being corrupt or obsolete. But there's an awful lot of people who feel critical and yet are themselves dependent on the Palestinian Authority. They employ over 170,000 people in the West Bank, and those 170,000
families
support an average of 7 people per person. So this is not an accident. This was a deliberate strategy of the United States and Europe to support the Palestinian Authority and make sure they have a constituency, even though they have no legal mandate. People have to realize that. Their mandate expired and they did not have new elections. So the current Palestinian Authority is appointed by the United States and is essentially a technocratic government without a legal mandate. And yet, through these employment relationships, they have a lot of support, even if the support is just people holding back their criticism. It's kind of a passive support. In In addition, I think real Palestinians are really struggling to know what to do. It's not as if they all have the right, everyone knows what should be done and no one's doing it. No one really knows what to do. It's really, really a tough situation. Folks are not united, and it's very hard to have discussion. It's a weird, hard historical moment in the West Bank, I think, but I'm not Palestinian, so I'm not speaking for anybody but myself. I think it's a very hard time to coalesce a kind of a strategic response.
And of course, as you say, I mean, this was intentional, the way the Palestinian Authority is operating, along with the fact, I guess you could say, that the Israeli authorities have been conducting a kind of sociological laboratory in Palestine in ways to disarm, weaken, divide Palestinians for quite a long time. And it's not surprising if there's been some success in that, right? I've even noticed, by the way, you talk about the psychological divisions between Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. When I've been in Ramallah, people talked about Khalil as though it was a foreign country in a sense. And maybe you've experienced the same thing. Not a foreign country exactly, but something different.
Well, you know, it's really not. I said it's impossible to travel from the West Bank to Gaza, and it's impossible to get out of Gaza unless you have very, very difficult to get permit from the Israelis. It's very difficult to get. It's very specific reasons. It has to be humanitarian reasons, and it's very difficult. But it's also hard to travel from Ramallah to Hebron for lots and lots of reasons. You have regular checkpoints and you have flying checkpoints. So if you have any kind of problem with your identity documents, you're not going to risk going through them. But even if you could travel through a checkpoint, it's exhausting to travel. There's so many barriers, so many detours, that to get anywhere takes a day, and you really feel depleted and depressed. The whole situation is depressing. You feel like you're always inefficient, and you're always, well, for me, being inefficient is a really horrible feeling. There's just a lot of things to do, and I don't want to do them slowly because of external obstacles. So I know people in Jerusalem who say they won't go to Ramallah because they don't want to spend the time to go through the checkpoint, so they don't go, and they haven't been in 10 or 15 years, and that's very, very sad. But the life under occupation is very tiring, much more so in more mundane daily ways than people realize. It's not the big political issues that are exhausting, it's the traffic, it's the checkpoints, it's the embarrassment when a close relative of yours gets married and you can't go, and you're embarrassed. And then you don't invite them to yours, and then how the families drift apart, and all of the other things like that, that over years and over generations have sucked the oomph, you know, out of the community. And it's not easy to get it back just because there's this the war going on doesn't mean that people can just in the moment reconstitute themselves. The young people today don't even remember the first Intifada. They don't remember. They were born then. They were babies.
Right. And the same goes, maybe even more so, regarding the separation between Palestinians living in the West Bank and those Palestinians living in 1948 Israel. Even though their proximity is insignificant, right? But there's a sort of cultural, mental, and social gap between them that I'm sure you're aware of. I've noticed too among my friends.
And that's why, strangely, a lot of people talk about the days before Oslo as being the good old days, because you could go from Kalkilia or Tulkarm, you can drive to Jaffa, and you can't do that anymore.
Right. When I first visited Tulkarm years ago, there were all these signs for auto repair shops because Palestinian citizens of Israel and Jewish citizens would go take their cars to Tulkarm to get repaired.
Which is now illegal.
Cheaper. Yeah.
And there's a big sign at the entry to Area A saying it's illegal to have your car repaired in the Palestinian Authority. I guess they're scared that they'll put some bomb under the car or something.
Well, and I guess it's also just enforcing this psychological separation too. I mean, it's part of this social planning, social engineering that the Israeli authorities are undertaking.
Right.
Now, how do your daughters react to this situation? I mean, psychically, you know, where do they find themselves in this constellation of identity?
The last month has been weird because the aggression corresponded with my daughter's high school graduation, which is, so there were many, many parties that were planned prior to this happening. And so there's all these considerations that go on. You're like, you know, so-and-so's having a graduation party, I want to go. I'm 18 and I want to go. But then there's like, well, how can I go to a party when people are getting killed? And then there's like, well, they're not going to stop getting killed if I don't go to the party. And why should I let the Israelis take away my, you know, my graduation phase, right? And this constant second guessing that makes it really hard to fully live life. And then there's the reality that on your way out the door, your mom will say to you, wait, where are you going? And she'll tell me I'm going to the Best Eastern. And I say, don't go anywhere till I find out what route you can get there safely. It didn't used to be that way. You know, you could go basically anywhere in the Palestinian side without asking if it's safe to get there. But it's not like that anymore. Nothing is safe. And we haven't let them go to West Jerusalem at all because they're beating up Palestinians in the mall. That's the mall where my girls go shopping, in the Israeli mall. There's two malls. They're beating up Palestinians on Ben Yehuda Street. So they crossed some weird, we didn't know that these social lines existed. Like you could have hatred, but you didn't beat people up in the mall. Meaning the Jewish Israelis? Right. And now it's all allowed. I mean, once these Israelis kidnapped this Palestinian boy and forced him to swallow gasoline and lit him on fire and let him burn to death, it's like all of the evil things that you could ever think of become possible, and then you want to hold your kids in a new way. I never was scared for my kids before in 10 years. It was safer in Palestine than it was in Newton, Massachusetts. Always in 10 years, but not now.
There are neighbors of mine in Dorchester, actually, who have American citizenship, and they send their kids used to send their kids to Ramallah because they thought it was safer than Dorchester, where I live. I don't know if they still think of it that way, but...
You are watching an interview with activist Jeff Klein featuring Dr. Nora Lester Murad discussing life in Jerusalem for an American married to a Palestinian and the current Israeli war of aggression on Gaza. Stay tuned. We will be back with more with Jeff Klein and Dr. Lester Murad describing the structure of NGOs and how they can more efficiently serve Palestinians.
You are watching The Arabic Hour, a program of news, views, culture, cuisine, and the Arab American experience. To view today's program or any previous programs, log on to our website at www.arabichour.org.
I want to get to some more general questions about the functioning of non-governmental organizations and charities in Israel and Palestine, and how that whole network of things relates. Because a lot of our viewers, people here who want to do something, who feel the tug of conscience to do something to help the Palestinians, show some solidarity, often they will make donations or support non-governmental organizations that purport to be helping the situation of the Palestinians. And I know you've had some personal experience with that. So I think it would be interesting to explore that aspect of things a little bit, how that fits into the picture of the sort of psychological sort of conditioning that you spoke about earlier. So could you tell us a little bit about your experience with this world of NGOs, and maybe we'll talk about its impact?
Well, when I moved to Palestine in 2002, I needed to do something professionally and in the world, so I kind of continued in the same kind of work I had done when I lived here in the Boston area, which was consulting to organizations either around organizational strategy or social change strategy. And first of all, I immediately found a tremendous amount of work, and I made a really lot of money doing work that I thought was high quality work, but it was absolutely irrelevant. So almost from the first day that I started working there, I became driven to understand what the heck is going on here. Why are all these Palestinian organizations paying me so much money to do something useless, truly useless? I mean, I can give you 100 examples.
Well, give us some examples.
Well, one example, I was hired to lead a team to do what they call a needs assessment for an Australia-funded, AusAid-funded project that was going to be in 3 or 4 villages in the Nablus area and 2 refugee camps. So I had this team of Palestinians that was supposed to go out and work with women and youth to gather information about their needs. And then we gathered all this information. It was like a 6-week-long needs assessment, and I had a staff and I got paid a lot of money, and we came up with these priorities, and then they did the project that they were going to do anyway. And it wasn't related to what people had said. It had been pre-planned. But in the pre-planned project was a needs assessment.
Right.
From that experience, a lot of, and many others that followed it, a lot of things became clear to me. One is that needs is the wrong focus in the first place. We should be talking about priorities. Because if you do a needs assessment, you'll get 1,000 needs, and the project you want to do will be somewhere on that list. And it was. They wanted to, the donor wanted to do youth leadership training, and it was there, number whatever, 8 or 10 or 12, whatever it was. It was there. So they were able to say, we responded to the needs as defined by the local people. We should be talking about priorities, because needs frames people as needy, which frames people as deficient, which frames the giver as higher. I'm the giver, you're the receiver. You are needy. I am giving you what you need. I'm making you whole because I have surplus. And this, it's not just a hierarchy, it's like a structural inequality of giver and receiver is built into the whole system of international aid and is fixed through language like needs. So I started to notice this in my work and to try to shift the language from needs to priorities, and all kinds of other shifts that I made. From those experiences, I became very critical, and I'm kind of known now as a fairly radical critic of international aid. And then I, with about 10 other people, founded Palestine's first community foundation, which is called Dalia Association. And the purpose of it is both to reduce dependence on international aid and also to promote Palestinian philanthropy and advocacy to influence the international aid system so that funds that are given on behalf of Palestinians are controlled by Palestinians themselves. And that was back in 2007. We became a legal entity. I was the director for a couple of years till 2010, and then I left, and there's a new director now, Saida Musa, and I'm still a volunteer here and there, and certainly a donor myself and a supporter of it. I think community foundations all over the world, especially in the third world, the developing world, whatever you want to call it, have a really important role to play, because Dalia Association approaches the Palestinian community as a community of abundance. rather than look at the thing that they don't have, which is surplus cash, we look at what they do have, which is a wealth of experience and skills and contacts and faith and culture and effort and history and ideas, etc., and creativity, a wealth, an abundance of resources which can be mobilized. But they should be mobilized under the leadership of the people who are affected. And that this recognition and this initiative is directly resistant and opposing to the idea of international aid, which is an international person in Brussels or in Washington, D.C. goes on a mission to Palestine, asks people what their needs are, goes back to Washington and plans an intervention which they then implement upon the people in a very take it or leave it type of way. And that even when those activities are good activities, the way they do it is so dehumanizing and disempowering that over these years of 20 years of Oslo, we have a cumulative denial of self-determination from international aid that's almost equivalent to and goes alongside with the Israeli occupation itself.
I mean, not to mention, I'm sure you've had this experience, I have, that in assessing needs, the Palestinians who work for these organizations, in assessing needs and priorities, it very often, either consciously or unconsciously, gravitates toward what they think the funders will like and appreciate, rather than what the real priority on the ground is. And a huge amount of energy is spent in that.
And sometimes it's not so subtle and unconscious. Sometimes it's very clear. The donor will come and say, I have $50,000. I want to do something with refugee women. What do you got?
Right.
And the organization will say, what can we do?
We'll find something.
We'll find something.
Right.
You want women? We've got women. You want refugees? We've got refugees.
That's been my experience too. You know, the first time I went to Palestine in 2004, because of my background in the labor movement, I had some contacts and connections with organizations, labor organizations and others. And the group I was with was directed to a meeting at a Labor Democracy Center in Ramallah. And I'll never forget, we went into this place, and of course it was a very nice building, nice offices. There were only staff around, there were no rank and file labor members there. And there were piles of literature and reports in English everywhere, which of course, you know, not very useful for Palestinian labor activists. So I already had some experience with that in the United States, and that's kind of confirmed my sense that this whole treadmill of NGOs and funding leads to a kind of corruption locally. If not literally taking money, at least corrupt in terms of your way of presenting who you are and what you need.
I think it's very corrupting, and I think right now is one of the most dangerous moments, because we have people all over the world, individual, well-intentioned and generous people, and institutions like CARE or Oxfam or Mercy Corps or whoever, all of whom are trying to respond to what is a real humanitarian crisis in Gaza. But the systems for that response are problematic. So one of the things that I have been saying, but I need to say in a more organized way, I'm not sure if it's going to be an article or I'm not sure what I'm going to do, but I kind of want to say to the world, think before you give. Because every time there's a humanitarian crisis, money gets diverted from local organizations to international organizations because they're perceived as being more credible and more capable. So you give money to whoever, you give money to World Vision, one of the biggest NGOs in the world and bigger than most corporations in some countries. And World Vision will buy cars and they'll hire staff and they'll have new offices. And at the end of the crisis, local Palestinian organizations will have nothing and will be more and more dependent on World Vision, because World Vision has, in a sense, used the crisis to strengthen their own...
Build capital.
Right. And I'm not blaming any individual at World Vision or any individual in the system. However, I think that there are individuals in the system who realize and are critical, and they should get out, And there are ones who don't realize and still believe that they have somehow the right to decide whether Palestinians get, school bags or medicine, that it's legitimate for them to make that decision. And those people should be exposed as being, neocolonialists, or they should be exposed as not being helpers. That's not helping. If you're really going to help people, it's the helpee who gets to decide if you're helpful. You can't help people without them. It doesn't work like that. That's not helping. That's just you controlling people, and whether you think you're doing it in their best interest or not is really not the point. The point is it's not your right to do that.
I want to pursue that for a minute, but I don't want to forget to let people know that the organization you're associated with has a website where people could find out more information. It's www.dalia.ps, and I would urge people to check that out. Now, just following up all these problematic aspects of charity, let's say, in the West Bank, still, there are people here and around the world who are motivated by perfectly sincere desires to help somehow. What would be your advice to them?
First thing we need to do, and I'd love anyone's help in this, is we need to really determine what Israel's legal responsibility is. Israel has caused $6 billion worth of damage, an estimated $5 to $6 billion worth of damage just in this month alone. Don't they have some legal, certainly they have a moral, but don't they also have a legal responsibility for some of the costs of the relief and recovery? As an occupying power, they certainly have a responsibility to pay for the well-being, to ensure the well-being of the occupied population. So I think we need to pin that down, and that's really important, because one thing that well-meaning people can do is not to let Israel off the hook. I had a girlfriend in college who was driving down the highway in California and hit the center divider. Thank goodness she didn't hurt herself or anybody else. But a week later, she got a bill from the state of California for the damage that she caused to the center divider. Now, Israel has caused damage to Gaza. Number one, what is Israel's responsibility, and how can individual people like you and I hold them accountable for fulfilling that responsibility? That's number one. Number two, whenever there's a local option to give to a local organization, we should give to a local organization. We should build the capacity for Palestinians to be self-reliant. That means if there's a local Palestinian civil society organization that's doing something, we should help them to do it. In fact, the international organizations like World Vision and Mercy Corps and Oxfam and CARE should be helping the locals too. They should not be competing with the locals on work or on fundraising. So if there's a local, we should support the locals. Secondly, when we do support international organizations, and there's more of a justification for doing that in a time of crisis than at any other time. I grant you that. I mean, people need water, and not everybody is equally positioned to bring the water in, right? Only the UN can do that, or to distribute the water, because they don't have the resources and the permissions needed to do that, water, food, medicines, etc. So when we do give to the international organizations, we should give thoughtfully, and then we should hold them accountable. We should be asking the UN, what are you doing with my contribution? Because I don't know that we know exactly what they're doing with that contribution. And then thirdly, or fourthly, wherever I am with that, I think it's very important for well-intentioned people to recognize that there's a downside to our emotional reaction to the news. The upside is, oh, I see the news, it's horrible, I want to give. That's good. That's fabulous. The downside is that Gaza goes off the news and we stop giving. So if people want to really help Palestinians, to help the Gaza residents, they should make a commitment to give in a sustainable way. It's better to give $10 a year than it is to give $100 and never give again. They should sustain their financial contribution, and they should always stay involved politically. Before this whole thing started, this recent, before the whole thing, that was a long time ago. But
I mean, the attack on Gaza.
Right, before July 8th, in fact, back in April, I was quite stressed about turning 50. I don't know why, because it shocked me that I was turning 50. On May 5th, I turned 50. So in April, I decided to do a birthday campaign for myself, and I opened a Gaza fund at Dalia Association. And then I asked people to do 3 things, not one. Number one, to do a political action, either write to a governmental representative or to the media calling for an end to the siege. This was in April of this year. Number 2, that they should make a financial contribution to the Gaza Fund, and preferably one over a period of time. And thirdly, that they should sign up for some news source so they would stay connected, so that even when Gaza is not on the front page of the news, it would be in the front page of their heart. And then I said to myself, because I'm interested in philanthropy, I said it's not nice to ask people for stuff without giving them stuff. So I gave the world a gift, which was I released a video every single day in the 31 days before my birthday, which is an interview with somebody living in Gaza. So I have on my website, if you go back to April, every single day, and this was before Gaza was in the news, you know, people talking about what is the siege, how they manage without electricity, what is it like to work in the tunnels that, you know, to Egypt, how dangerous that work is and how no one's looking out for the safety of the workers. Early marriage issues, people's efforts to recycle in Gaza, all things. They decided what they wanted to talk about. I interviewed them on Skype, I videotaped it, and I put it on my website and I distributed it, and that was my gift. I said to people, I'm giving you a gift, now you're going to give me a gift because I'm turning 50. I've been working for a lot of years, we're not getting anywhere with this Peace with Justice, you know, thing, so I want those 3 things from you. Now, why did I start this little soapbox or rant? I don't know, but it had to do with my birthday.
Well, that was, you got there, but it was sort of what people could do productively to show solidarity and support the Palestinians.
That yes, they should give money because money is needed, but they should give it thoughtfully, they should give it in a sustained way, and they should not only give money, they must also use their political effort to make a difference, because people in Gaza actually don't want food. They want the bombs to stop and the border to open so that they can live like normal human beings.
So the best thing an American can do to help the Palestinians is change the policy of our government in support of Israel.
Absolutely.
But if people did want to, well-meaning people did want to make some gesture of, you know, financial support to Palestine, how could they learn what the most fruitful and beneficial ways of doing that are?
I'm happy to be in touch with people and give them my thoughts, but I'm not willing to be a gatekeeper when people say, who should I give to? Because that's the thing that I'm trying to get away from. It's not for me to decide. I'd rather put them in touch with people in Gaza. Right now is a very, very hard time to do that because, I mean, I'm still in touch with my friends, but not even on a daily basis. They don't have electricity, they don't have internet. A lot of people are displaced. And even my friends who I can find on Facebook and Twitter every day are so exhausted. It's never, ever, ever been this bad. People are so exhausted. It's been a month without sleep, a month of hearing about the deaths of loved ones and colleagues every single day, and people really have gotten to the point where they don't know if they're going to be alive in the next couple of hours. So that kind of conversation I used to have where I'd say to people, look, there are people who want to give in Gaza, what do you think's important, how should I direct them? People don't have energy right now. But there are organizations like Dalia Association that have a Gaza fund, like Dalia Association does, and some people are trying to work thoughtfully and strategically. And anyone who wants to be in touch with me, I'm happy to have the conversation. Dalia Association is one option, but it's not the only one.
And people can also reach you through your website, NoraLesterMurad.com. So I think, I would encourage, I hope we can stay in touch after this, and I would encourage our viewers to pursue that as well. And here, I don't know if you're staying in Boston, but Monday there's planned another big protest against the attacks and the siege of Gaza. And positively, I think the twin targets of that is it's going to start at Government Center, the federal building, which represents U.S. government policy, and it's going to end at the Hewlett-Packard corporate convention. Hewlett-Packard, as you know, is a computer company that supplies hardware and software to the Israeli security forces. So if you're here, we hope to see you
I'm hoping to be there.
And those who are listening, we hope they'll attend too. So thanks very much for being with us today, and we look forward to being in touch in the future.
Thank you.
That was an interview with Dr. Nora Lester Murad discussing her life in Jerusalem and NGOs aiming to help the Palestinian people. You can visit her website at www.noralestermurad.com. Stay tuned, we'll be back with more after this short program ID.
You are watching the Arabic Hour, a program of news, views, culture, cuisine, and the Arab American experience. To view today's program or any previous programs, log on to our website at www.arabichour.org.
Thank you so much for joining us at the Arabic Hour today. Some stations will be leaving us, and we look forward to seeing you next week. For those of you staying with us for the remainder of the hour, we hope you enjoy the last musical segment following the closing credits. On behalf of all of the volunteers here at the Arabic Hour, this is Ghanwa Hakim, and I look forward to seeing you next week.
The Arabic Hour has been brought to you in part by the William G. Abdullah Memorial Library, a resource center for information and education on the Arab American experience, the American Arabic Benevolent Association, ABA, an umbrella association for community endeavors, the Nicholas G. Barham Veterans Association and Ladies Auxiliary, providing veteran services, scholarships with community pride, and by our members as well as contributions from viewers like